Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dr. Downey, and today we're going to discuss whether creatine is better than steroids. And I'll start this off by saying obviously steroids are better, but creatine does have some useful benefits that I think anyone or everyone can benefit from. So we'll start off with giving a bit of background information about creatine, how to use it, and then I'll go over the benefits of creatine. So creatine is a phosphagen. It's part of the phosphagen families, and 2/3 of it is found as phosphocreatine, and most of this is in the muscle. So 95% of this is in the muscle, and 5% is in the brain and the testicles. And most individuals, those who are eating an omnivorous diet with meat, will have about 120 millimoles per kg. I'll display a graph. So as we can see, normal individuals or those eating an omnivorous diet will have higher stores than a vegetarian will of creatine. And if we look up at the taller graphs, that's how much you could potentially have with creatine loading, and I'll get onto that just now. So as you could clearly see, the vegetarians had lower stores, but which would mean that they would benefit greatly from supplementation. Furthermore, you could see that creatine, when paired with carbohydrates or protein, resulted in the best amount or the highest saturation. But the reason vegetarians have lower amounts and omnivorous people is because creatine is found in red meats and fish. But we do synthesize our own. I'll get into that just now. So people commonly worry about creatine degrading into creatinine, because then this raises your creatinine level and then looks bad and indicates poor kidney function, but only 1 to 2% of creatine is degraded into creatinine. And if we look at the average individual, most of us use between 1 to 3 grams of creatine daily, and a lot of this is synthesized in the liver and the kidneys, and we use that to replenish what we use. But as I said, you can get creatine from other sources such as supplementation or eating meat and fish, but you'd have to eat quite a high quantity of meat or fish to achieve adequate creatine supplementation. So what does creatine do? Well, its main role comes from the creatine kinase and creatine phosphokinase phosphocreatine system. And this essentially acts as a buffer to allow for more ATP to be made, essentially, and not get used up too quickly. So ATP is like an active energy molecule. It gives energy to certain systems, such as muscular contraction. And the more ATP you have during an during an effort, the better you are at exerting your maximal effort. And it also is required in anaerobic exercise at the like sprinting and things like that. Furthermore, this whole system, this creatine kinase phosphocreatine system, actually helps with transportation of ATP to active sites where it's going to be used. So you can see that it's quite useful in metabolism and energy distribution. So let's look at the dosing protocols, and this all comes down to creatine loading and creatine saturation. So the average individual will have between 60 to 80% saturation of, so 80 to 60% of the muscles are fully saturated. And this is why loading is required. As someone who is active, like an American football athlete, they're shown to use up to 10 grams of creatine a day. And if you're only supplementing using 3 to 5 grams daily, even with your body producing its own creatine, that will not allow you to reach successful saturation. And full saturation has been demonstrated to be linked with greater effort which is able to be produced. So it is important to have greater saturation because you have a greater buffer then. So this brings in the whole creatine loading. So what you do is you take 5 grams of creatine 4 times daily for a week, and from there you maintain your levels on 3 grams to 5 grams daily, but for larger athletes this could be 5 to 10 grams daily. And as I mentioned, there are benefits of having this full saturation, because the full saturation allows for a greater buffer and greater maximal effort. What is interesting, however, is you can retain a higher level of saturation if you pair your creatine with carbohydrates or carbohydrates and protein, as seen in the graph we showed previously. However, if you stop taking creatine after saturation is almost 100%, it will take about 4 to 6 weeks for it to return back to baseline. People commonly say the creatine needs to be cycled because otherwise you stop production of creatine in your own body, or there's downregulation of the creatine transporter system, which actually has never really been showed before. It was shown in earlier studies, however it's been disproven with higher quality studies. So in terms of its bioavailability, creatine monohydrate is what I'm going to refer to here as it's the most studied. Form of creatine, and it tends to peak within an hour after ingestion and is nearly 100% bioavailable. So this kind of makes other forms of creatine kind of redundant, since their claims are that they're more bioavailable when creatine monohydrate itself is already bioavailable. The concern, though, is that when creatine mixes with an acidic and warm solution, it converts to creatinine. And the problem with that is then you're not getting creatine, you're getting creatinine, and it raises your creatinine levels. However, whilst this does happen ex vivo, not in vivo, as I mentioned, this hasn't been demonstrated in humans, and they suggest that maybe 1% is converted to creatinine in the whole ingestion process. But what's interesting is using that whole method to convert creatine to creatinine outside the body is actually used to pass drug tests, but that's a topic for another video. So with all the background information out of the way, let's see how useful creatine is in practice. Multiple studies have actually demonstrated that creatine supplementation allows for more creatine in the muscle, and this allows for greater acute training capacity as well as training adaptations. These training adaptations pretty much allow you to do more or expend more effort during a set, and you can do more repetitive sets at this high level of effort, which has been correlated to greater gains in strength, muscle mass, as well as just general performance. And I'll show you that in a meta-analysis just now. So in another study, after creatine loading, performance of high intensity or repetitive exercise was generally increased by 10 to 20% from what it would have been not if they hadn't taken creatine. The only issue, however, is that studies just done in women haven't shown to be of much benefit, or the results are equivocal, but I would assume we are more or less similar, and creatine could benefit women just as it benefits men. And if we look at this meta-analysis that I said I would take a look at, this was in both female and male older adults, and this was about supplementing creatine and seeing if they got more tissue, muscle tissue, and more strength. So this is a meta-analysis, so it's essentially a combination of very high quality randomized control trials which compared creatine to placebo. And in these two groups, they trained 2 to 3 times a week for a duration of 7 to 52 weeks, so that's quite a big gap. But in the creatine supplementation group in that period, they had significantly, and I mean significantly, greater lean mass gains compared to placebo. They had 1.37 kilograms more of lean tissue after training than, or after this duration, than the normal individuals not taking creatine. Their chest press strength also shot up quite significantly, as well as leg press strength. And this led the International Society of Sports Nutrition to conclude that creatine is probably the most effective nutritional supplement currently available to athletes in terms of increasing high-intensity exercise capacity. But the benefits of creatine extend beyond just strength and short bursts of energy. There are other benefits of taking creatine. It actually enhances recovery. It does this by enhancing glycogen loading. When combined with carbohydrates alone result in glycogen increased glycogen stores, but when paired with creatine, the glycogen stores were much greater than that of just carbohydrates, and glycogen stores are required after exercise to help with recovery. Cook and his associates actually demonstrated that creatine decreases markers of muscle damage, such as creatine kinase, and decreased inflammatory markers like TNF-alpha. They also made athletes deliberately overtrained, and they noted that in the creatine group, they actually maintained to keep the same level of function whilst overtraining. It also has been shown to be beneficial in injury prevention. So there's no cause and effect established as of yet, but creatine users have been noted to experience less muscle tightness, cramping, less non-contact injury, or fewer non-contact injuries, and fewer total injuries than those not taking creatine. Furthermore, it's used in rehabilitation, and Hespel and his colleagues demonstrated or reported that individuals taking creatine during the rehabilitation program had a 25% increase over placebo in their strength, as well as 10% more muscle fiber dense or cross-sectional area. So they had more muscle fiber in the muscle they were trying to heal or improve. There are also benefits such as reduction of neuromuscular fatigue and neuroprotection from spinal cord injuries. But the benefits extend well beyond that of exercise, and I'll perhaps get into it in another video, but it's also been shown to be protective in ischemic heart disease and stroke. It actually reduces the ischemic area and protects the tissue around the ischemic area. There's also new evidence that it could be beneficial in neurodegenerative conditions, and it also has been found to be useful for those who are experiencing side effects of aging. Their cognitive function improves by 5% when taking 3 grams of creatine daily. So I think it's quite an underrated supplement, or perhaps maybe it's not, and that's just my opinion, but I think most, if not all, athletes or people who are doing exercise could benefit from creatine. So I hope you found this video informative. If you did, leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.